everyone. English is not my first language, so if I say anything that is unclear, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. What do you mean by? I love English, I think it's an amazing language, but every now and then I make some mistakes, syntax and whatnot, so by all means do ask me. The other thing that I want to frame into the conversation is that you will get a lot more out of it if you participate, right? So you can just sit there and I can just show you some slides. We've got 130 slides, we won't go through all of them. Usually it's a much longer session, but the point is that you'll get a lot more out of it if you try to participate. I'm going to encourage you. So if anything I say is not clear, or if you want to ask a question or share an experience, and especially if you disagree with me, please raise your hands and let's have a conversation as well. In terms of my background, why am I here? I work as a coach. I do leadership and life coaching. I've done mindfulness stuff for the last 35 years, and I use mindfulness-based approach to my coaching as well. So I'm kind of swimming in the space, so to speak. I've trained with Rick Hanson, who's developed the model of positive neuroplasticity, and I usually teach it. And so this is kind of just an introduction to the domain. But hopefully enough for you to walk out of here with some ideas and some tools and practices. I want to start with acknowledging traditional owners, past, present and emerging. But I want to do it through a story about this particular man. His name is Burnham. Anyone remember him by any chance? No, he's disappeared out of awareness, unfortunately. He was an activist in the 80s and the 90s. And in 1986, I think, I went to a conference with him up in Brisbane, and he was talking about Aboriginal life in general, living in the bush, growing up in the bush and all that. And he did that for about an hour. And after an hour or so, a woman got up in the back, and it was clear from her accent that she was, I think what you call an ochre, right? Like a sort of a very typical Australian out of the bush, and she had a very thick accent that I did manage to understand. And she said something along the line of, I've lived around Aboriginal people all my life, and I think you can stand and talk to them for 100 years and you wouldn't be able to understand them. And then he looked at her for a little while, and then he said, maybe if you try and sit next to an Aboriginal person and not talk to them for 1 hour, maybe you'll start to understand them. And there was this beautiful kind of, sort of sense in the room. And I think it's a really nice way to illustrate that the whole point around mindfulness is that we try and have a conversation about something which is beyond words. And it's in the silence that we actually get to it. And I think it's a nice way to sort of frame it. The reason why he was a little bit famous is because he went over to the coast of Dover in the UK and stuck an Aboriginal flag in it and declared the UK Terra Nullius, just to sort of make a point, right? So that's Burnham, and I pay my respects through his story. We're not going to be able to go through all of that, but I want to talk a little bit about the concept. I find that a lot of the time we can talk about mindfulness, but everyone has very different idea what mindfulness is, so I think it's important. And if we get some chance, we'll explore some ideas around language evolution, and then we'll get to neuroplasticity. Again, if there's anything that is not clear or you want to talk about it, please stop me, okay? About 2 years ago, I was trying to translate some ideas on mindfulness from English to Hebrew, which is my original language. I grew up in Israel, and I realized something fascinating about language. Right? If you think about it, basically, a word is like a box that you put an idea in. Right? So if I want to give you something, if I want to relate something to you, what I do is I put my idea in a box and I give it to you, which works great when I talk about a table. Because I just put the idea of a box, the idea of a table in this box called table, and I give it to you, and you, okay, table, I know what table means. And it works really well because it doesn't matter if you have the same table, right, or maybe a table like that, right, in your head. But you know what the functionality is, you know what to do with it, it's really very, very clear. That's easy to communicate. When we start to talk about abstract stuff, it gets tricky. So if I want to communicate the idea of confidence, that will mean very different thing to you. Depends on your background, your upbringing, whatever it is that you go through, right? So when we want to talk about stuff like mindfulness, it gets quite tricky because we're looking on as a way to communicate stuff which is beyond words, and we're looking to do it through words. and usually using some abstract kind of words to describe it, and the communication gets very quickly in this sense. It certainly gets trickier when you talk about the stuff like enlightenment. I was very pleased that I found a bottle of wine that's enlightenment. I thought, because there's this meme, you might have seen this meme that says, there's a woman sitting next to a bottle of wine called yoga, and she said, I used to be really stressed until I discovered yoga, right? So I used to be really stressed until I discovered enlightenment. So the point is that when we try to talk about those concepts, it gets really tricky because our definitions of those concepts is very, very different, and we're talking about really abstract stuff. It also explains why sometimes when we start to talk on philosophy and explain philosophical idea, the conversation gets very diluted in a sense. It's very hard to actually convey some of those ideas because basically, in order for you to get to a really complex aha, you need to take a whole set of boxes and put them together until you get a kind of a bigger box. And out of that bigger box, you go, oh, okay, I'll get it. So if you think about the idea of positive neuroplasticity, right? These are three words, like what is positive here? And neuro is kind of like, okay, neural system and plasticity. But it gets like that. And a good way to sort of understand it is when you think about quotes. Because what a quote does is it takes a whole set of boxes and it gives you this bigger idea. And what's the difference between a quote and just a sentence with a whole lot of words? What do you think is the difference? What does a quote do to you? A quote that you relate to, what happens with it? It moves you, right? So suddenly there is all this stuff, there's box, a whole set of ideas, and then you get this big idea, and that big idea touches you. Usually around values, right? Usually relates around values. I like this particular one about, relation to enlightened by Jung that says one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Right? So again, like if you look at those words, enlightenment, imagining, darkness, conscious, all of those words are kind of like, he does not mean, notice that this is an example, like he does not mean the fact that there's no light in the room, right? And you get it, you get that the context is different. But language is different, is very tricky, and I want to point that out. Just as a sort of a fun exercise, I challenge you to define yourself as best as you can in 6 words. So an example would be a power woman striving for a saner lifestyle. So if you got an A in there, that's okay. You don't need to be religious about it. But or something like committed surfer in search of a purpose. Or for myself, very much worried parent seeking to impact future. Yeah. So if I ask you to do that, if you want to do it in your head or do it on a pen and paper, I'll give you like 30 seconds. See what is the best definition you can come of yourself in 6 words. Care to share what are the 6 words? Yes, please. What's your name?
Kurdish.
Kurdish.
Yes.
Yes.
Trying to make an impact for women in IT business.
Okay, great. And that's like you can see how you can actually pack a lot of information because we can get value.
Right.
Your values are in that sentence, right? Yeah. There's strive, right? There's the subject of gender empowerment. Yeah, and there's a sector where it is. Beautiful. What else? Someone else? Yes, please.
Trying to fight against corruption.
Trying to fight against corruption. Right, okay. So Prato has something, so like this is taking on a big challenge, right? Yes. Fantastic, thank you. Who else? Yes, please. What's your name?
Right.
Grace, yes.
Human trying to connect to source.
Right, beautiful. Human trying to connect to source. Okay. Source, an interesting word. What would you say source is?
Oh,
Ah.
there we go. The greater being.
Okay, something beyond.
Beyond us.
Right,
beyond
okay.
words.
And we kind of get it, but notice how the conversation can get very woo-woo in a sense. Not because there's no substance in what you're saying, but those words are very, very hard to define. They're very big boxes, basically. I mean, how can you put the divine inside a box, right, so to speak? Yeah, in fact, how many people heard of the Tao Te Ching? Right, so that's most of you. So that's basically an ancient text about 2,500 years ago. There was a courtier, someone who was advising the emperor in China, and his name was Lao Tzu, and he created basically what's called Taoism now. And the first sentence of his book starts by, the Tao that you can speak about is not the real thing. The Tao meaning the way, divine, source, whatever, consciousness, right? If you can speak about it, you're pulling something beyond words into words. You can't really speak about it. An analogy that sometimes is helpful in this sense is that if you think about how they discover black holes, because you know what's happening in black holes in space? The light disappears into them. So you can't see them, but you can see the light bending, right, towards them. So they discovered black holes by seeing how the light bends as it approaches black holes, right? Sometimes you can think about consciousness a little bit like that. Good teachers, what they do is they bend words toward consciousness in such a way that you kind of get it, right? People like Thich Nhat Hanh, Eckhart Tolle, those sort of people, they work with language in such a way that they can talk about something beyond language, and you still sort of get it. Yeah. One more person, please. Yes, please. What's your name?
Anup,
Anu. Yeah. What's your 6 words?
striving to create prosperity through innovation.
Beautiful, right? Striving to create prosperity through innovation. Also notice that no one is sort of defining them by, sort of hanging out dude with, with a big car or something like that. Like we go for the stuff that moves us. Yeah, that's what we want to lead, right? Okay. So we talked about the notion of language underpinning how we define things. Let's try and define mindfulness in a way that is actually helpful for us. So I always like this. I saw it as a bumper sticker a long time ago. It's actually said meditation. It's not what you think. But in the same sense, mindfulness is not about the thinking process, right? But what do we think about mindfulness? It's certainly a buzzword, right? It's at the moment is like this is it, the new sort of corporate solution for everything, and I'll mention this in a second. But it's certainly a buzzword in the workspace at the moment. However, if again you go to this idea of like, okay, this is a box that people put in it references, we usually put a collective of whatever we got out of culture, our own experience, what people told us. Anyone here have a regular mindfulness practice every day? Right? Usually about a third of people have started something. So some people have personal experience, but most of us actually hear about mindfulness as a sort of a hearsay, right? We put stuff in it. And so what you get is you get stuff like that, right? You have unrealistic expectations about mindfulness. It's like sitting on the cushion for 3 hours a day. Or even this, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that we associate with going into that sort of domain. And of course, there's an interesting problem in the fact that as soon as we start to talk about mindfulness, we're kind of using the mind to understand the mind. And that's tricky if you think about it. It's like you use a tool to understand the tool, right? And the reason why I've got that story is because you might have heard that story before, but it's out of Stephen Hawking's book. And it talks about an astrophysicist who was in front of a class teaching a whole group of people about the universe and how the universe is built, and he was talking about stars and sort of the Big Bang and all that. And eventually someone got in the back of the room and said, "Oh, that's rubbish. Everyone knows that the world sits on top of 4 elephants." So the astrophysicist, feeling a little bit smug with himself, said, "Oh, okay, well tell me, what do the elephants sit on?" And he said, "Well, everyone knows that the elephants sit on top of a turtle." And so he was still feeling smug because he knew he couldn't, like that person couldn't go with a reason along that. And he says, "So what does the turtle sit?" He says, and I said, well, everyone knows that it's turtles all the way down, right? And I think part of the trick for us is when we start to sort of look at mindfulness and look at how do I understand our own consciousnesses, that it's sort of turtles all the way down. For us to understand it on the thinking level is not possible, right? So we're dealing with that when we talk about mindfulness. And if you look at, we can go to a historical model and look at Eastern traditions versus Western traditions. So the Eastern will be more like the qualities that will come up will be more around alertness, attentiveness, stillness, emptiness, effortlessness, while the Western models will be more around devotional, transcendent, and quite often fairly structural and authoritative. But that's because the patriarchy has taken it into sort of a ride, right? But basically, if we talk about mindfulness from those backgrounds, we'll get that sort of feel inside Boxer. And now, of course, excitedly so, I should say, it has become something that the corporate world is trying to deal with. And how many people heard of this program, Search Inside Yourself? Right? So Google has come up with this program called Search Inside Yourself, which is basically a mindfulness-based approach to how you understand yourself and how you communicate. They developed the training, it's very successful, they spread it right around the world. But it gives us a hint of something that's gone awry in the world of mindfulness as it became a buzzword. And the hint is, it says born at Google based on brain science, okay? Based on brain science is fantastic, we want that, right? That takes it out of the Google then. But why am I irked with born at Google? What's wrong with that?
It wasn't born at Google.
Right. It's like this is sort of usurping, or is it called cultural appropriation? These are ideas that's been around for thousands of years. They certainly weren't born in Google, right? And it leads us to something that I want to qualify very carefully when we talk about mindfulness, because we do tend to do that, right? And it is what Alan Clements, who's a Buddhist teacher, he comes here quite probably once a year, once every couple of years. Really worthwhile if you like language and mindfulness. Brilliant teacher. But he calls, watch out for the disguised indulgence in our innate and unexplored narcissism. Because very much what you can see in the mindfulness space is that we get into places where people are just kind of like me, watching me, in the pursuit of me, understanding me, in order to feel better about myself, right? So there's a lot of sort of narcissistic edge to mindfulness now when we just use it to sort of like feel better about it. And by extension, and this is actually quite a problem, you start to see that happening in the corporate space, but in a very particular, one could almost say sinister usage. And what I'm applying for here, what I'm trying to sort of appeal to your senses here, is that we need to watch out when concepts like mindfulness and awareness get hijacked to corporate agenda, in the sense that, yes, you might work for 12 hours and we can send you email at 11 o'clock at night, but it's good because we provide you a meditation class at lunchtime, and you should feel fine about that, and you shouldn't feel so stressed because we know you know how to deal with stress. So it's almost like it became an excuse to continue the same sort of mindset that ultimately, right, allow organizations to deliver unwholesome roots of greed, ill, and delusion, which is by ill will and delusion, which is basically the basic sort of blocking, the stuff that blocks mindfulness in the Buddhist tradition, right? And it's usually being refashioned into a banal, therapeutic self-help technique that can actually reinforce those roots. So all of that, I think, is something that we need to take in when we try to sort of understand mindfulness. If we do want to go into, okay, what are really good definitions of mindfulness to sort of get an aha, get an idea, then this one is a fairly classic one, and it's really, really useful. And basically, mindfulness in this sense is paying attention in the present moment with full awareness and without judgment. Okay? So pay attention in the present moment, that's pretty clear. Why do they need to add with full awareness? Like, if you pay attention in the present moment, well, what's the point of doing full awareness as well?
About the emotional awareness affects the emotional as well.
Okay, yes, but sharpen it a bit more maybe. You can pay attention, right, in the present moment and not be aware that you're paying attention in the present moment, right? You know when kids do something and they stick their tongue out, they go like that sort of stuff, right? They're paying attention in the present moment, but there isn't the awareness of doing that. And that's quite an important part for us, because then we are conscious of us being conscious in a sense. Yes, please, David.
What awareness of doing what? Is
Of
that
paying attention in the present moment.
sticking,
To whatever.
Sticking the tongue out? No, in your example of the kid sticking the tongue
No,
out.
what I'm saying is, as a kid, usually they can pay attention and be present with what they're doing, but they're not necessarily aware of doing that. Right? You can sort of do that and still not be aware that you're doing that. And you want to bring a level of being aware of doing this. In other words, there's a duality here of two levels of awareness. One is awareness of what you're doing, and another one is awareness of you being aware of doing it. If you really sort of want to dive into it. Does that make sense? Maybe?
Does the tongue have anything to do with it?
No, that was just an example. Just an example. Yeah. Yes, please. I know.
I think what you are saying is that at any time we may be doing something, and we may also ourselves be a witness to it if we are doing something.
Yes.
So
Correct.
it's that
Right. Yeah.
sense of being a witness.
Yeah. Developing the inner witness, so to speak.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you use the word the observer,
Observe.
right? So you're not in your personality, you're not on your automatic pilot. You kind of observe what's going on as you do it, right? And why are we saying without judgment? That's also quite an important part. What's a judgment? What sits in the box of judgment?
Conditionality.
Okay. So there's boundaries, there's parameters of things are in a particular way, and when they're not in a particular way, there's a standard there. You're looking at, okay, it's not like that. There's a comparison.
Yeah, subjectivity and perception.
Right. Correct. Right. Now, if you notice, you cannot do that in the present moment. You need to split out of the present moment in order to be able to judge, because you got to go somewhere to be able to apply judgment, right? If you're just present with something, there's no judgment, there's no thought. Okay, so this is why one of the reasons why it's such a good definition, and it comes from Thich Nhat Hanh. Emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman is the kind of the purveyor of emotional intelligence, and this is certainly a great development in the corporate space, in the sense that it is becoming a lot more clearer to us that it's EQ, not IQ, that makes great leaders. Right? It doesn't mean that IQ gets in the way, but it's not the IQ that makes the difference, sort of thing. EQ seems to make a lot of difference, right? So he is saying that mindfulness is applied emotional intelligence, right? Emotional intelligence in action is mindfulness. Why do you think he says that? There's a level of awareness that comes in, right? You can't do EQ without developing awareness to self, awareness to others, awareness to context, right? So in some ways, you got to be aware, you got to be mindful of what's going on to be able to exercise that. Another way to sort of look at it is basically this idea of paying attention to the experience of paying attention, right? So again, this sort of level of awareness. I want to talk a little bit about evolution just before we get into the European. Yes, please, David.
Are you saying kids are not mindful, cannot be mindful?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
Yeah, I gave an example of a kid being concentrating, right, and being really present and doing something, but not necessarily. They might be in fairyland. My daughter definitely says she lives in she lives somewhere. She's very present with what she's doing. She's very focused, but she's also in a story. She's not present of herself doing it.
How do you know that that story isn't the truth? Reality.
Yeah, okay. It's turtles all the way down. I don't. Okay, let's talk about evolution. What's the number one rule on the planet? Right, yeah, absolutely. Basically, it looks like that. Eat lunch, don't be lunch. That's pretty much it, right? In one way or another, when you strip away a lot of the narrative, at the end of the day, right, even though it manifests for us as species, our developed modern state, as a very different expression of it. At the end of the day, that's what it was. You know, a dog-eat-dog world, the whole thing, right? So that's what's going on in nature. Now, what's interesting for us is that it means that we are forged by what you could call the dark forces of survival, right? Remember Gandalf? One ring to rule them all, right? This is the one rule that rules all of us, right? We are forged in that sort of environment. And so what it actually means is that our nerve system is wired very much for this survival mechanism. So we have two types of nerve system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And you might have heard this expression of the fight-flight response, which basically means that you're all the time geared to be able to respond very fast and survive, right? So you have one system that sort of slows you down and another system that speeds you up in a very general kind of term. But our nerve system has been underpinned in terms of its evolution by 250,000 years of humanoid survival, of how do we survive as humans, right? And prior for that, another 1.25 million years of kind of pre-humanoid, but certainly conscious, quite highly evolved creatures that also went along that route. In other words, for millions of years, the main thing that we've been dealing with is eat lunch, don't be lunch. And so the trick for us is that it inhibits the way that we interact in the modern world, because we would like to be this, right? What happens when zebras are, if you look at zebras in the savannas, what do they do most of the time? They just graze, right? So they're just chilling out, they're just hanging, everything is fine. Call it the green zone, right? They're in green zone and it's kind of nice and pleasant. And then what?
Lion comes.
Predator, right? What happened when the predator attacks zebras?
They run.
Spring into action, everyone, like, every unit in the, what is it? It's not a tribe, it's not a pod, it's not a school, what is it?
Flock.
A flock? No, it's not a flock of zebras. A group? A herd. A herd! It's a herd of zebras, right? So a herd of zebras just spring into action. Everyone is in fear, fight, flight mode, in a sense, right? So what they're doing is they're doing green, 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 and then a spike into red. I can't tell if this is
It's fake.
Photoshop.
It's fake.
Anyway, this is more likely to look that, right? So anyway, so you got green, 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 red spike, full alert, 100% survival, and then what? Someone like George or Lucy goes down, right? And what happened with the other zebras?
Green.
Back to green within 20 minutes, right? They're all kind of like green, 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 spike, da, 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 da. And the one that didn't make it, but all the others pretty much within 20 minutes are back into grazing, right? Our nerve system has evolved to match that. So we supposedly, right? Our response system, our operating system is influenced, right, like a zebra in the savannah, by how we sense well-being in danger in sitting either in the green zone or the red zone. Any questions on this? This is really quite an important point. All good? Right. So, what do you think happens to this guy? Is he in red zone or is he in green zone?
Red.
Right. And how long is he in red zone?
A lot.
Right? So unfortunately for us, what seems to have happened in the way that we are wired is that we got kind of like low hum red, low hum red, low hum red, red spike, low hum red, right? In other words, we kind of move the whole thing up and we have very little green zone in our life. And we have a nerve system that is wired or geared toward operating in the green and relaxing most of the time, instead operating in some sort of a stress level all the time. Because what our life looks like is more likely like that than that. Right? And this is where the concept or the application of positive neuroplasticity comes in. It's like, how do we remedy that? How do we flip the coin on the fact that our life is so stressful? Any question? Good? Okay. So if you were considering your current workplace as your savannah, right? Describe what are your daily grazing habits versus who are your predators. So just turn to the person next to you and for a few minutes, just share with them how do you graze, and who are your predators at your workplace? Is everyone clear on that?
Like I just recently went to this big trying to yeah.
Just as soon as I do stuff, I'm cool and I appreciate what I achieve. So walking away on my when I have a plan. When basically everything seems to be like so scary, so monumental event of me.
Is it quality work? Yeah. Quite good. Yeah. As they're looking at it in a small form, they'll be able to read it too. I'm not a perfect.
I know, yeah. Do you ever get feedback about people actually saying, "Yeah, I watched the whole thing"? Because it would be fairly straining to watch.
Yeah, but I get steps. That's the whole thing.
Yeah, okay, good.
So I feel like what he's talking about, like so, like, for example, like, once you like the database, right? The database is not large, like, it's what I needed to do, but I'm finding now that it's sort of restricted in the direction that I'm going and I think it sounds like it's like to be better. So like I have all this notion like but the important thing is for us to be like so stressed out about it. So even people have but it is, it's a form of temperament and something that you can go back and fix it. Yeah, so I'm going to like stick with it, but sort of
So, a couple of examples of grazing habits. Who's got a good grazing habit?
coffee in the morning.
Right, okay. Sort of, it's a bit of an odd one, right? Because it sort of spikes you, but there is a sense of comfort in it, and a sense of, you know, sort of being ready to work, and engaging and stuff like that, which is probably what, is that right? Would you say that's right?
It kickstarts. It's like, all right, here we go.
Yeah.
Like, so.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. What else? Yes, please.
The work itself. So,
Oh, okay.
like when I enjoy doing my work, like
Right.
that in itself is grazing.
Right, okay. But notice the word you use, enjoy, isn't it? Like there's an element there of, it will be fairly hard to graze with a job that is really irksome or difficult or tricky, right? Or involve a lot of stress in some way. You're lucky,
Yeah,
I guess.
it can be both ways. There's like, like there's two types of stress. So you've got eustress and distress.
Mm.
So like, if the job
Talking
is
about
bringing
eustress,
out that
yes.
eustress, then it's grazing in a way.
Yeah.
And but if it becomes like distressful, then
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. So when
like
we're
the red
in the
zone. Yeah, yeah.
right? We're in the green zone.
Yeah,
Yes. Fantastic. Thank you. David?
I agree totally with it. being proactive. When you're working on your own goals and you tick those boxes through the day, then it's all green. As soon as you become reactive, that basically someone else is dictating what you're doing, and you allow that to happen. That's a red zone. So when someone else dictates you have to run, then it's quite stressful. If you decide to run on yourself because you feel like running is a cool thing to do right now, then it's totally green.
Right. And you did. Like, has anyone ever worked with cows? So you did, right? So I worked in the kibbutz, you know, the Israeli communities, the farming communities, for about 2 years, and some of it was with cows, and I've discovered that they're delightful animals. Really enjoy, you know, even though they live in feeding lot and all that, even then they still find there's a lot of joy in the cow if you just kind of let it be, right? And they can be they just enjoy it. They're running around, they're playful, that sort of stuff. We tend to think about it as a dumb animal. And yes, it's not a dolphin, but you know, there's an element of just being playful. That's what I hear you saying. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Yes, please.
I think because we've both come from professional services, we skipped the grazing habits and just talked about the predators.
Why go green when you can just hang out in the red?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, we prime for that. I mean, in some ways, do you think zebras work when they graze? They don't probably perceive it as kind of like there's something for us that we've adopted, which you know, like we've not meant. Again, if you look at how we evolved, we never worked like that. We never worked as in coming to a place and spending 10 hours doing the same stuff pretty much in front of a particular place and all that, right? We did a little bit and then relaxed and did a bit and relaxed and a little bit and relaxed. I suspect that women always work harder. Yeah. But by and large, you know, there was a lot more kind of that work-life balance, that elusive sort of word. It's a terrible word because it sort of implies that you're not leaving when you're working, right? But that sort of stuff, right? So it's interesting that you kind of like, oh, well, we're not even going to talk about that. But what did you discover in terms of your predators then?
We had common predators and
competitors. Competitors, clients.
Right.
Can also be predators.
Right, because they raise your stress level, because you got to deal with it. Can you give me an example?
I think clients with high expectations.
Right.
Yeah. And with things like you can't really control. So
Yeah.
I had a competitor who was also my client, which was really painful because being a competitor, it would be better for them if I didn't exist because I wouldn't take their business.
Right.
But because I was also their client, you know, they would, you know, prefer I didn't exist, so they would always complain about me. So.
It sounds quite tricky.
I think it's just goes with the territory.
Right. Yeah. Indeed. But you can see how there's just hundreds of little things in a work day that could become predators, that could become stressors. Because it's not even the other person, it's the relationship in our head about the other person. You know, like, what do they do? Are they asking this because they want to find what I'm doing? You know?
Yeah, one, I had to manage a relationship with that person, but also I had to manage a relationship even more so with people who weren't from the industry, who I worked with, who were stakeholders in what I did. So, because, you know, to educate them on this is the norm in the industry, this is what happens in financial services.
Yeah.
You know, what's that movie? Julia Roberts. Eat, Pray,
Love, right? Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah. It's the one where she goes to Bali, she goes to India.
The story is much more exciting.
Yes, indeed.
But,
thanks. Okay. Any other predators?
Michael,
Yeah.
isn't that predators or whatever you say, is it not self-created? Because this is my perception.
Right.
You have to understand yourself. If you understand yourself, then you will sort all the problems. Because you understand that whatever around you is not a problem. The problem comes when you do not understand yourself.
Yes.
And you start judging others. The point is, the question I normally ask, am I good enough to judge myself? Do I understand myself first? If I do understand myself, that's the enlightenment.
Right, that's the bottle of wine.
That's what I want. So then there's no predators.
Yes.
Predators are the creation of your mind.
Right.
It's unreal. What is real is you, yourself. And if you can live by that, that's all is what you want.
It's a good practice.
Good practice.
Sort of sit in green zone.
But living and making living is different.
Yeah.
That's the perception. I mean, you try something, try and do that yourself. Have you sat down and asked yourself, you breathe, right? Have you paid attention to your breath at all? What it does to you? We take things for granted in our life. So, there are so many things in the world that we have been given, we still crave. Why? We have, I want that, I want this, but you have so much in this world that you can live and recognize and cherish, yet we want some more. And that's the problem.
Going back to what he said about, taking the way from me in mindfulness and being aware. Because, I can be confident in myself, I can be aware, I can know myself, but I cannot control what other people know.
Yeah.
What were you going
I
to say?
just wanted to share something.
Yes,
So
please.
today morning, even before my day had started, I was in bed. So it takes me 40 minutes every day to get from work to the office. Left home at 7:37 today for an 8:30 meeting, so should have been fine. But it took me 3 hours. There was this climate protest rally or something.
Right.
So from getting to the city, and I had a meeting at 8:30. So first was just let them know I'm running 10 minutes late, but then to say I'm probably another half an hour. So very red. But then later I decided, sorry, can't come. You just have to reschedule. After that, I put on music and I said, now I can't do anything about it. So I went from red to real green for that time in the city I got myself into.
Yeah.
Because when you can't control something, you just got to say, okay,
Yeah.
fine. That's what it is.
Indeed.
So there are predators which you have to deal with, but I think it's about trying to get back to
Yeah.
that's
The baseline, right? So just a sec, I'll just say something. So my experience with this sort of stuff is that it's very easy to go down rabbit holes, right? And we can spend the next hour just on that. And I'm a little bit weird because I do want to explain neuroplasticity and positive neuroplasticity, but very, very valid point. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say you can control how you react to that situation. I don't know what's going to happen, but yeah, you can keep going down the rabbit hole.
So I'm just going to throw that and then we'll move. But basically, take it like that. We don't have a relationship with objects or processes or people. We have a relationship with our thinking about them. That's the relationship that we have, right? And so if we get that, then we realize that if that's the relationship we have a lot more power to change, right? The relationship we have in any given situation. So the Dalai Lama, for example, say, if I have a problem and I can't do something about it, then why worry? And if I can't do something about it, then why worry? Right? Like worry is not going to make any difference in this sort of sense. Okay? So there's a lot of freedom for us if we start to engage with our life in a way where we stop being victims of a situation and start to say, okay, well, how do I want to feel about that? In a way that is resourceful, in a way that I can actually move forward. We get stuck a lot at, do what's right. My grandmother used to say, don't do what's right, do what works. We can get really stuck on what's right, and it is right according to some sort of a standard, ethical, moral, whatever it is. But the question is, does it deliver the results that you want, or you're just getting annoyed, right? So to go back to your points, yes, it's all about the relationship you have with stuff. It's certainly the case. Any other predators? Because I'm looking for a couple other predators that usually come up. Yes, please.
I think when you're working on, especially on a project,
yes,
your past and your future selves are predators. There's the stuff I have to learn, the stuff I have to accomplish way ahead.
Yeah.
There are the mistakes I might have made or things I could have done differently in the past. And if you don't have a good relationship with those two people, then you're sort of it's impossible to be in the current moment without it being chaotic.
Yes, indeed. So again, we apply some sort of a standard that is just an idea in our head, and we compare what's going on with what should be there, and then we get stressful because it's not there, right? Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. What about the boss? Is the boss a predator?
Yeah.
Right. Why is the boss a predator? I mean, the boss can be very nice and still be a predator. Why?
It's pushing you to do things.
Because your survival depends on him or her, right? So if you look at our original sort of tribal way of being, right? We all live within a sort of a confined social group, maybe 100, maybe 150 people. We all knew each other intimately. We all knew the hierarchy of that sort of setup, but our survival wasn't dependent on it. We ate. We might not have eaten, maybe we weren't the first one who ate, but we ate, right? Now what happened now is that you have this kind of relationship which is diffused, and you might have this circle around one, and this circle around two, and then there's thousands more people in bigger and bigger concentric sort of spaces around you, but you don't have an assured survival. Like if you don't do your stuff right, you won't get paid. You won't get paid. You won't eat. Now, no, this is not conscious, but what it does is it means that when you have a relationship with your boss, somewhere in the back of your mind, you've got to have that relationship in a way that includes the possibility that you might not get paid if you don't perform in a particular way, and you don't have control on the way that you want to perform. That person is, right? So that is a sense, in terms of threatening the internal system of putting us in the red zone, is very tricky. And I think what the good bosses do is they're able to kind of diffuse that. They're able to communicate to the person that even though I'm deciding whether you can be employed or not to the degree, right? It's like, that's not on the table. There's a story, I can't remember, I think it was IBM, fairly early on when they just started, and one of the employees made a huge mistake and they lost $1 million. This was in the 70s, it was a lot of money, right? And so that, they were really freaked out about it, and they went to the boss and they said, well, you're gonna fire me. And the boss says, you kidding? I just spent $1 million training you. Right? So where am I gonna fire you? Like, that's an investment in our future, because we've all learned from that sort of communication.
Can I just add one there?
Please, yes.
Time for me.
Deadlines, that's the second one I was looking for, right? How many people have, in some way or somehow, have deadlines at work, right? Most of us have deadlines. Yeah.
I'm running my own business, so I feel like I never have enough time to get things done.
Even
And I'm running
trickier.
out of time.
Right, yeah, even trickier, yeah. Because you can't stop, there's always more to do. And more
Yeah,
to do
and I just
because
think
more to do.
I should be doing this and I should be doing that. I don't know how to relax.
Yeah.
Time is
Yeah, very tricky.
very tricky.
How many people work for themselves? Right? So it's interesting because our work culture is shifting to the point where we either work for ourselves or we work in a very kind of loose arrangement of. In fact, I think that the science or the research suggests that millennials are going to work in five different careers, 17 different jobs over your lifetime, right? So a very different situation and a lot of uncertainty, right? And uncertainty is a kind of a predator in that sort of sense as well. Yeah. How are we doing for time? We don't have, so we'll skip this one. Let's talk about neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is an interesting discovery for us because up till about 15 years ago, the notion of neuroplasticity wasn't actually very prevalent. The whole idea was that, it was known that the brain grows and rewire. One of the reasons why teens go crazy at the age of, how many people have teens in the room? Does anyone have teenagers? Yeah, right? Like their brain really goes through a huge phase of culling down thousands and thousands and thousands of connections. So it comes with all this capacity to learn a whole lot of stuff. By around the time of the teenagers, a lot of it starts to shed, right? One of the reasons why they're all over the place. Yeah. But anyway, the point is that up till about the age of, say, 25, 26, the brain grows, right? And at that point, it stops growing in the sense that it starts to lose some cells, maybe 10,000 a day, right? So at that point, because they could weigh that, because they could measure that, they thought, oh, well, the brain stopped growing at the age of 25, right? MRI comes in And what they discover is that the brain can rewire itself continuously into your 80s and into your 90s. So what does that depend on? Why would the brain rewire?
Like the information you're feeding it and the way that it adapts to its environment?
Yes, but there's something more specific to that, right? Because you can do the same job, right? And it's the same job day in and day out, and you feed in the same sort of information, and you might have a new calling that you need to adapt. You know, there might be elements that you need to adapt, but you wouldn't rewire your brain very much. It needs to be, yes please.
By practice and challenging it.
Practice?
Practicing and challenging it.
Right, so by actually stretching the way that you think and what you do, like if you have a particular way of doing stuff and a particular way of thinking, right, and you always just use that, then you're not going to rewire your brain. If you want to try an interesting experience, try and, you know, like if you're right-handed, use your left hand to eat and vice versa, right? So if you change the way, or brushing your teeth, try and brushing your teeth with the wrong head, so to speak, right? If you do that long enough, you rewire your brain in a new sort of way. So we've discovered that. We've discovered that basically, you know, it's, won't get into that, we don't have time, but we basically, right, our brain is a product of our thoughts, so to speak, right? What you think your brain will become. Our thoughts are invariably the product of our instincts and our upbringing, okay? Much of the daily activities are driven by autopilot. And we want to find a way to challenge it, to change it. And basically neuroplasticity is like a toolbox that allows you to hack your brain, to redesign your thinking, yeah? And so, it's okay, I don't need to say that, but basically what it leads us to is this understanding that our thinking changes the way that we perceive things. Our thinking changes the way that we speak. They change the language, and the language changes our actions, right? And the actions become our habits. Our habits become the way that we are, a character, so to speak. And you can go as far as saying, well, your character creates your destiny. So in these little building blocks, the way that we think, right, actually affects very much the way that we are in the world. By the way, I found about 15 different versions of this quote. I was a bit surprised to see Margaret Thatcher attributed to Margaret Thatcher. I don't think Margaret Thatcher said it. I think the Buddha said it quite well. And it's very similar. It says the thought manifests as the word, manifests as the deed develop into habit hardens into character, right? And so he said then, which is really quite interesting for us on the positive neuroplasticity aspect, he said, watch the thoughts and its ways and let it spring from love, right? Let it spring from love, which is born out of concern or kindness for all being, okay? So the suggestion for us here with positive neuroplasticity is not just the idea that we can change the thinking, but to let that sort of thinking be the kind of thinking that cultivates good stuff. In a way, building what's called a bank of good. I think that's the next one. Yeah? Okay, so Rick Hanson, who developed this model, he calls build a bank account of good thinking. Now, why is that? What's the driver of us having so many negative thinking? Why? Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that most of your thoughts are negative? On average, the research suggests about 70 to 80% of our daily thoughts are negative in nature. Why do you think is that? Yes, please.
I suppose projection. So if you can kind of become aware of something that's a potential predator, kind of being aware of that, so then you can then react.
Yeah, right. So we need to be ready. Okay. Yes.
I was going to say the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
To look for what's wrong.
Yes.
So you can either protect yourself or fix it.
Right. Because the repercussion of not responding to what's wrong is a lot more dire than responding to what's right.
Yeah.
So think about it this way. You walk down to the water hole and you come across a tree of mango, right? Great, fantastic. You're going to eat mangoes, you're going to enjoy, lovely, yum, yum, yum. If you didn't notice the tree of mango, what will happen? You'll notice it tomorrow, or you'll notice another tree. Not a big deal, right? However, you walk down the water hole and you didn't notice the lion. Yeah. Never any mangoes for you, right? No more mangoes. So the repercussion of not embedding, responding, reacting, being prepared for negative experience are so much more dire that our brain has evolved to work with the negative material. Okay? So So what they find out now is that negative thoughts embed and sort of turns into memories much faster and much deeper than positive experiences. You can think about it this way. If you go out with your friends and have a great dinner, you might remember it the next day. It might be, oh yeah, that was a nice dinner or whatever. But it doesn't leave a residual imprint, a big strong imprint in the way that you feel about things, right? But if you went out for dinner and had a fight with someone, you're going to spend the next 2 days reenacting that fight in your head. I should have said that, and then I would have said that. So, in other words, we just prime for negative experiences, and because of that, we're lacking that wiring that sort of brings it back into balance, right? We want to rebalance it. Yes, we do too.
Yeah, I think I challenge that assumption that 80 to 70% of our thoughts are negative. I try to be positive, and I think I'm an optimist, so I think I'm the opposite. Is there something wrong with that?
No, it just seems to be a particularly happy person. Good for you. Yeah, be happy about that. No, there's something wrong, but you should worry about it now.
Yeah, I think now I'll worry.
Get more grumpy.
Yeah, get more grumpy. No, look, I mean, that's an average. I'm not saying, there's people there who are happier. In fact, they found that happiness does seem to have some sort of a genetic tendency. But to counter that argument, so if the people who were happy-go-lucky didn't have children over thousands of generations because they didn't notice the lions, they didn't notice the tigers, they kind of like, oh, mango tree, sort of like that. And then someone came and ate them. They didn't have children. So, in other words, we are descendants of 250,000 years of evolution of the suspicious, gnarly, jumpy, edgy kind of generations. Because the other ones didn't survive. The tree-hugging hippies didn't survive most of the generations, right? Mm-hmm. And so, by default, we wired for that negativity, which is why I suggested about 70% or 80% are, And, it's a bell curve, okay? Yeah. Do you get that, right? And so what you want to do with positive neuroplasticity is, how are we doing for time? Okay, so it's 1:30. I can finish now, or we can just do another few minutes. Where are you at? Yeah, a few minutes. Okay. So what you want to do with positive neuroplasticity is you want to start to cultivate little moments where you really appreciate what you're doing and you're conscious about it. And as silly as it sounds, what it does is that it cultivates this imprinting of those positive experiences in your brain. Guess what will happen when you start to be more aware and more conscious of positive experiences?
Start saying no.
Pardon?
Start saying no.
You start to see more of them because your brain starts to rewire itself, and instead of noticing the half empty glass, it starts to notice the half full glass. So something interesting about our perception is that we assume that we see reality, right? Because we can interact with it. Well, it turns out we're not. What we see is an image of reality as we understand it, which is filtered through our biases and through our learning and through our experience and our projections and whatnot. In fact, just recently they've done really interesting research where what they've done is they've taken a mathematical model of survival and reality and they ran it for hundreds of thousands of times, as in how would the brain react to reality. And what they find out is that in a very minute case of those sort of simulation, the brain actually would react to reality. It by and large reacts to the chances of survival. In other words, we don't actually see survival. There's no reason for the brain to see reality. For you to survive, what it sees is what will make me, what will make me safe the best. That's what it sees. And so we want to kind of flip that. We want to start to create moments for ourselves that allow us to cultivate those positive experiences in a really conscious way and embed them. And in that way, over time, it doesn't take like tomorrow, it takes a long time. There's research around it. You read 21 days usually, but that's actually that's an outlier. It's usually the average is about 66 days of changing some sort of a way that we think about it. But if we stick to it, if we create little habits of happiness and we're really conscious of them, whether, for example, you're conscious when you brush your teeth, or whether you make a point to go and hug a tree, or whether you notice the wind when you come out of the building. Right? How many people are parents, just in general? Okay. The tricky for us is to make sure that we go down to the level of the kids and really be there with them, because busy life, it's just so easy to say, oh, busy, da 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 da. There's so many moments of joy that we miss out, you know, with a friend, with a child, with a parent, and all that, because we're just busy. And so unbusy yourself 5-10 times a day for a minute. It doesn't take that long to start to kind of neuroplasticize your brain into the direction where we're more happy. And you obviously done some work on that, you know?
Yeah.
Is that true?
I'm going home now to be with my grandchildren.
There you go.
Yeah.
So as a parting note, what I want to suggest is that we all have ways to activate the parasympathetic nerve system, and that is just using a diaphragmic breathing, so to speak, right? Because what happens is that when we breathe normally, that's sort of around the sympathetic nerve system, but if you breathe into your abdomen, you switch on the parasympathetic nerve system. So the diaphragm is a very interesting, it's like an umbrella shape or parachute shaped muscle, and when it contracts, your belly expands, right? So when you breathe it, like you don't actually breathe into your tummy, right? But when you sort of feel like you breathe into your tummy and you expand that, you switch on your parasympathetic nerve system. So as an experience for us, what I ask you to do is close your eyes and put your hands on your tummy. Put your feet straight down on the floor and kind of straight back. And then, if you feel comfortable, close your eyes and just start breathing into your tummy slowly, allowing it to expand. Feel your hands expand. And then slowly breathing out. And again, slowly expanding. And breathing out. And one more. If you open your eyes now, can you notice the difference in the quality of just how you sit and how you're aware with what's going on? And if we did that with 3 short, relatively short breaths, imagine what you could do with a couple of minutes in the morning, couple of minutes in the evening, right? Even more so, as a trick of the trade, if you're stressed at work, right, and you need to kind of respond, if you just stop for a sec and just kind of like fill your tummy, and just be alive for a sec. Oh wow, I'm breathing. I mean, don't take it for granted because it ain't gonna stay there forever, right? So you just like, I'm alive, you know, and just be celebrating that for a second, 10 seconds, 20 seconds before you move into the next stress or the next response. You'll start to change the quality of your life just by doing that little bit, right? So these are the kind of stuff that we can play around with. And so we don't have time to do that. But what we will do is we'll go around the room and I'll ask you to nominate one practice. Short practice, it can be, I'm going to be present when I brush my teeth. I'm going to smell my food and really appreciate it. You know, when someone smiles at me, I'm going to say, wow, you know, I really, like, take it in, like, be really conscious. I'm going to ring a friend every day, whatever it is. One practice that you're going to take from here that's going to start building a bank of good for you from here onwards. So, if you don't mind, we'll start with you. We'll just sort of go like that. Just breathing, like more conscious breathing. How would you do it? Just be specific, because it's very easy to say that and then we forget, right?
Like you recommended.
Right.
You know, deep breathing through my stomach.
So, okay, so some stress arise and you're just going to do that for a sec. Fantastic. Because then you got a trigger. If you want to develop a new habit, you got to have a trigger that reminds you to do that, right? So that's your trigger in that sense. Okay.
Sit in the chair, but it's a really cool chair, and I'm going to stand just one, so I'll sit there probably twice a week.
Right. Just be present. Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Beautiful.
What I do often is conscious of my breath, going in and coming out. Do it for a few seconds. Next one.
That's right. You cannot not be present if you're conscious of your breath. There's nowhere to go. You've got to be conscious. You're present. That's a fantastic little trick. Yeah.
Mine would be something to do with sun, like feeling that sound and the reason you move from one country to another, it's important.
Yeah, just breathing. So something that you do and then time in when you're in a conversation and you're distracted by all of something, you can just
No worries.
take those couple of breaths and reset to become present.
Yeah. Please.
Can you just
started a couple of weeks ago. Every time I stop at a traffic light, I take deep breaths. Helps the agitation.
Right. Yeah. Fantastic. So again, like sometimes you look for an irritant becoming the trigger of a good practice, because it's easy. You notice it, right? You can't avoid noticing it. And, yes, please. Thank you.
Smiles, giving more, getting
Yes. Right. Yeah. If you see someone without a smile, give them one of yours, right? Yeah.
I guess walking to the train and to work, to be mindful of the trip to get there.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So not an automatic pilot as well. Because what we see is we do two things. The first level is we just go into our head and we kind of walking, but we're not there. And the second thing which happens now is we're not even there. We're here, right? Yeah, that sort of stuff. Yes, please.
There is a around biking,
Right.
staying present while I'm biking, trying to find my way
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Actually, from those 2 points, something that I forgot to mention but really helpful. If you want to imprint positive experiences, notice your senses. Don't just be because it actually activates more part of the brain. So it's like, oh, this is a positive moment. Okay, what am I smelling? What am I feeling? What am I sensing? What am I hearing? Not just the sight. That's really helpful. So banking will be fantastic, right? Yes, please.
Stepping away from the desk lunchtime, just to refresh yourself.
Right. Yeah. Not gulping food in front of the computer. Yeah, it's important. Yes, please.
Something that I used to do, but I realize now that I forgot about it for the last few months, is waking up in the morning and really feel when you're making the bed, like feeling the fabric, and really look outside when you open the windows and touch the curtains, and really be aware of touch and your sights. It's a nice way to start.
Lovely, absolutely. And it changes completely. There's another whole tone instead of like jumping and going to.
Yeah, setting aside time in the evening where even if it's just like 10 minutes before bed, where you're intentionally not using your phone or your computer or thinking about work.
Yeah.
Or with yourself when you fall asleep.
Okay, lovely. That's great. Yeah. David?
Walk slowly. Stop rushing. The breathing comes automatically when you get out of this rushing behavior, and you start absorbing your surroundings when you get from A to B. Just plan a little bit more time to be on time, and then move as slowly as possible and absorb the world around you.
Beautiful. Fantastic. Thank you.
Think good thoughts and imagine good things.
The brain doesn't know the difference between real and not real. Right? We don't have images in our head, we have electrical impulses. So when we imagine stuff, right, for what's going on inside in terms of your brain, the brain actually just processes it in the same way as if it's real. This is why top athletes imagine themselves winning, that sort of stuff. So it's really useful in that sense to get into a practice of imagining that. There was a beautiful little quip in the 80s, I remember. Practice random acts of kindness and senseless beauty. Just do it, right? Just for the sake of it, because it will bring richness to your life. Yes, please.
Yeah, for me, maybe just find our favorite song and just break for a while and say something for good.
Right.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I have started doing this, but being more present with my children and myself from the phone.
Yes. It's so easy, isn't it? It's like because we're there and we engage. Yeah. All they need is a minute. Thank you.
I swim 3 times a week, and I love being in water. I just love being in water, and I think it's anything that really calms me down.
Yeah.
But I think I need to be more present, and I need to love enjoying the sound of the water and feel it. So instead of going in and just doing laps and thinking I've got to go,
Right.
I want that.
Competing with yourself.
Competing with myself is because I like being in the water so much. I don't have enough time.
Right.
So, but being present and enjoying that moment is what I like to do.
Savoring this.
So in the morning, just do that. It's just to have that extra 10 minutes.
I find that practicing gratitude works all the time. The other day we were rushing to the airport, and the flash went off, and my wife is, "Oh my God, are you speeding?" I said, "I must have been, because otherwise it wouldn't flash." "No, you'll get a fine." I said, "No, I'm grateful that I have a car that I can drive, and let's not worry about it, because these things happen." So practicing gratitude is a good way of staying happy.
And something that's so easy for us to overlook, but we do live in one of the luckiest countries on the planet, right? And there's so many people who've got a lot of hardships just to put food on their table. That's all they do from the morning until the evening, right? And we just take it for granted so easily that it's there, right? Like we have light, we have water, we have all that sort of stuff. So it's really useful practice in that sense, because it's very easy for us to be grateful. The minute you kind of tune into it and realize how lucky we are. Right? Thank you. Yes, please.
Maybe take a short walk before going to bed, so just to calm down and refresh.
Right. Unwind. Yeah, right. Fantastic. Okay. Any last questions? If you get the principle, the rest of it is just go and play, right? Like find stuff that works for you.
I'm sorry, we actually do need to wrap it up.
Yeah. No, that's it. That's what I'm saying. Any last? No. Good. Okay. Thank you very much. Come and talk to me if you have any questions.